My name is Azel. I'm 22 years old, and for the past 12 years, I thought I understood what love was supposed to feel like. Not the fairy tale kind, the real kind. The kind where you know the sound of your partner's footsteps, the way they pour their coffee, the way their voice dips when they're tired but still trying to be kind. For most of our marriage, Daniel and I were easy together. Not perfect, God, not perfect, but there was this flow between us. He'd come up behind me when I was cooking, slide his arms around my waist, and kiss the side of my neck just to hear me laugh. On Sunday mornings, he'd still pull me back into bed, even if we were already awake, just to steal a little more. Those small things made me feel chosen, even on the boring days. But I can't pinpoint the exact day when those little gestures started to feel scripted. Like he was going through the motions because that's what good husbands do, not because he actually felt it. His kisses began landing closer to my cheek than my lips. His hugs, those warm, all-encompassing squeezes, slowly became these brief, almost distracted touches, like he was checking something off a list. We still touched, but it felt like touching through glass. It wasn't sudden. That's the worst part. If he'd stopped cold one day, maybe I could have asked, maybe I could have fought harder right then. But instead, it was this slow erosion. A shift so subtle, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The night before it happened, before my husband's boss stopped by, we were sitting on the couch. My legs were draped over his lap like always, and he had one hand resting on my knee. The TV was on, some late-night comedy rerun, and he laughed at the screen. But his hand, it wasn't moving the way it used to. No gentle squeeze, no absent-minded stroke along my shin. Just still. Heavy. Present but not alive. I remember glancing at him, wondering if I should ask what was wrong, but his eyes were glued to the screen. I leaned my head on his shoulder anyway, trying to close the distance, trying to remind myself that this was still us. He tilted his head slightly to rest against mine, a polite reflex. And for a moment, I hated myself for noticing. I keep telling people, or maybe just myself, that marriage changes. That it's normal for passion to fade, for comfort to replace desire. But lately, it's felt less like comfort and more like absence. Like I've been slowly disappearing in my own home. The morning it all shifted, I woke up to Daniel kissing my temple. A soft, habitual peck. I smiled, but when I turned toward him, he was already swinging his legs out of bed, reaching for his phone. I told him I'd make coffee. He said thanks without looking at me. I used to tell myself this was just life. Work stress. Getting older. But deep down, something sharp was forming, this ache, this awareness that we weren't us anymore. And then, later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Just a quick, unexpected knock. When I opened it, it was his boss, a man I'd met only once before. He smiled like he wasn't in a rush, even though he said he'd just stopped by for a minute. That was the moment, though I didn't know it yet, that would stay with me. Not because of anything overtly wrong or right that happened, but because of what it made me feel. And the thing is, I can tell you the exact second I realized my marriage had shifted. It wasn't when he stopped kissing me with meaning. It wasn't when his hugs felt like obligations. It was when a stranger looked at me for less than 10 seconds, and I felt more seen than I had in months. Daniel's boss, Mark, didn't stay long. 20 minutes, maybe. He dropped by to hand-deliver a signed contract Daniel needed for a big renovation project. Daniel's an architect, the kind who still sketches plans by hand before putting them into software. He's proud of that. Mark lingered at the doorway, asking me polite questions, how long we'd lived here, whether I liked the neighborhood. His voice had this low, unhurried cadence, and for reasons I'm still not entirely comfortable with, I didn't rush to answer. I let his eyes meet mine and stay there for a beat too long. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly, it was something more basic, being noticed. When Daniel came into the hallway to join us, he rested his hand on my back. Firm. Possessive. It should have made me feel claimed, but instead, I felt claimed without being known. Like a book pulled off the shelf by someone who never bothered to read the inside. After Mark left, Daniel gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, the kind you give someone before heading to the grocery store, and went back to his office upstairs. I stood there with the taste of polite conversation still in my mouth and this strange, hollow sensation in my chest. That night, we had one of those near arguments that isn't about the thing you're saying it is. I'd made dinner, roasted salmon, his favorite, and when I set it down in front of him, he smiled in that absent way, already scrolling through his phone. I asked him to put it away. He did, but not before finishing whatever text he was typing. I was listening, he said when I fell quiet halfway through telling him about a book I'd started. Were you? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. He looked at me, genuinely confused. Of course. I'm here, aren't I? That's the thing, he was here. Physically. His hand brushed mine when he reached for the salt. His knee bumped mine under the table. He even leaned over mid-meal to kiss the side of my head. And yet, it all felt like touching through gloves. Daniel has always been more physical than verbal. Even in our early years, he'd tell me he loved me more with his hands than with his words, tucking my hair behind my ear, pulling me into his lap, resting his palm on the small of my back in crowded places. I used to melt under that kind of attention. But lately, it feels like he's skipping a step. Like he's trying to build a bridge starting from his side without making sure it connects to mine. After dinner, he came up behind me while I was rinsing dishes, wrapped his arms around my waist, and kissed my neck. Once, that would have been enough to erase any tension between us. But I froze, not because I didn't want him, but because I did. And I knew if I turned around, he'd read my willingness as consent for everything else he wanted in that moment, when what I needed was for him to just hold me and ask how I really was. Hey, he murmured against my skin, you smell amazing. Thanks, I said, drying my hands, stepping slightly away under the pretense of reaching for a towel. He didn't push, but I felt the confusion radiating off him. He thinks love means showing up physically, because that's how he feels it. And maybe I've always needed more words, more questions, more quiet moments where someone listens like they're memorizing me. Later that night, in bed, he reached for me again. His hand slid over my hip, warm and certain, and I wished I could match that certainty. But my mind was still replaying the hallway earlier, not because of Mark, but because of how quickly Daniel's hand had followed, as if to reassert his place. It wasn't a competition. It shouldn't have felt like one. And yet, somehow, it did. When I turned toward him, I kissed him softly, hoping he'd feel the hesitation in it and ask me why. He didn't. He just deepened the kiss, reading it as a green light. And maybe I let him, because it was easier than explaining that my body was here, but my heart was somewhere waiting to be asked in. 2 days later, it happened again, one of those moments where Daniel thought he was showing me love, and I was quietly folding in on myself. We were in the kitchen late in the evening, the air still smelling faintly of the pasta I'd made. I was leaning over the counter, scrolling through my phone, when he came up behind me and smacked my butt, not hard, more of a playful tap, and then rested his hands there like it was his home. I forced a small laugh, but my shoulders stiffened. Hey, gorgeous, he murmured, leaning in to kiss my jaw. You're extra pretty tonight. It should have made me blush. It used to. But instead, I felt this weird irritation bloom in my chest, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Thanks, I said, stepping away to pour myself some water. He frowned slightly. What? I can't touch my wife? It's not that, I said quickly, avoiding his eyes. I'm just not in the mood for all that right now. All what? I just said you looked nice. His voice wasn't angry, but it had an edge, the kind that comes from feeling rejected and not knowing why. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. It's hard to explain. Try me, he said, crossing his arms, but he was still close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. The thing is, I couldn't explain it without hurting him. I couldn't tell him that every time he touched me lately, it felt like a prelude to something else, that there was this invisible script we were both following: touch, kiss, escalate, and I didn't know how to stop it without shutting the whole moment down. So instead, I shook my head. Forget it. That night in bed, he reached for me again. His hand on my hip, his thumb tracing small circles, familiar, practiced. I wanted to turn toward him, to kiss him like I used to feel that rush again. But my mind was already racing ahead. If I kiss him back, he'll think it means more. If I pull away, he'll think I'm rejecting him completely. I stayed still. Not cold, not hostile, just still. You okay? He whispered. Yeah, just tired, I lied. He kissed my shoulder, lingered there for a moment, then rolled onto his back. I stared at the ceiling, my body humming with a mix of longing and guilt. The worst part was, I did want him. Or at least, I wanted to want him. I missed how effortless it used to be. I missed not having to overthink every single touch. But now, even his most innocent gestures felt loaded, like stepping onto a train I wasn't ready to ride. And somewhere in that quiet, I caught myself thinking the one thing I didn't dare say out loud: why does everything have to turn into sex? It was a Friday night, the kind of night Daniel usually liked to make special. He'd texted me earlier that day, let's have a date night at home. Just us. When I walked in after work, the dining table was set with candles. Music, something soft and jazzy, played in the background. He'd even made my favorite, chicken piccata, which he almost never cooked. I wanted to appreciate it. I really did. But the moment I saw the way he was looking at me, that familiar, heavy gaze, my stomach tightened. Not because I didn't want him, but because I could already feel the trajectory of the night. Dinner was fine at first. We talked about his latest project, his meeting with Mark, yes, that Mark, and the tension in my shoulders spiked when he mentioned how lucky I am to have you. Said you made quite an impression the other day. I smiled tightly. Oh? What exactly did he say? Just that you were warm, welcoming, beautiful. He reached across the table to take my hand. He's not wrong. I should have taken it as a compliment. Instead, something sharp slid under my skin.